In class, we've been talking about the movement of Romanticism, which was born in the Enlightenment, like Neoclassicism, and ran parallel to Neoclassicism, although is a very different approach to Enlightenment themes. It also outlives Neoclassicism quite significantly, lasting really all the way to the end of the 19th century. In class, we discussed the fact that Romanticism was very much interested in the freedom of the human soul, and begins to explore that theme in a sort of darker themes, in particular death as a way of freeing oneself from this mortal coil, from the bonds of everyday responsibilities, but also certainly insanity and dreams as being part of that as well. So when we looked at Jericho's work on the right, The Wrath of the Medusa, we talked about the fact that it really does deal with this very dark theme of cannibalism, shipwreck, man's inhumanity to his fellow man, but also the futility of our actions against nature, which is far stronger. On the left, Millet's Ophelia from Shakespeare, the wife of Hamlet, or fiancée of Hamlet, that is, shows her the moment she's gone crazy and has drowned herself, or is about to drown herself. Again, giving over herself to the power of nature. Nature will, in fact, consume her. This screencast will look at more romantic landscapes and really dive into this theme of the power of nature and how romantic painters in the 19th century approached this particular theme. Perhaps the best example of romantic era landscape painting is the British painter, the English painter, Joseph Mallord William Turner, about whom there was a biopic made a few years back, Mr. Turner, which is really a great watch if you're interested in his works. But he's certainly one of the most foremost painters of the human struggle against the powers of nature. In this particular image at the National Gallery, he shows the place where the Thames River flows into the North Sea outside of London. And if you've ever been somewhere where a river flows into the ocean, you know that if it's a powerful, fast-flowing river like the Thames, there's what's called a breakwater, where the already turbulent sea becomes that much more turbulent because of the confluence of the river and the tides that are there, especially if the tide is coming in as the river is flowing out. This very, very powerful, active part of nature, where water could consume any boat at any time, is made even more dangerous in Turner's picture by the oncoming storm. And so what we see in the image as we look at it is all of these people struggling as best they possibly can against the assembled forces of nature. The little boat almost swamped. We see elements that have fallen off of other boats floating around in the water. A sense of peril as the ship on the left keels over quite a ways as the winds have hit its sails. This is a very, very dangerous place. The works of man are all but futile here in a nature so powerful. Later in his career, Turner's style begins to change to the point where he's less interested in a sort of depiction of what nature looks like, and instead becomes interested in trying to channel how nature's forces might feel. And so his paint becomes really abstract as the clouds themselves and the forces of them seem to swirl around the canvas, almost as if they break free. So this particular image, a biblical image, shows the legend of Noah's Ark, which you see in the deep distance here, floating off away as the floodwaters rise, the deluge rises. And in the foreground, we see a group of people left behind on what was once dry land, now hit deep in water as the seas are raging and rising with sea creatures in the lower right corner springing up out of it. But despite any of this sort of descriptive narrative that Turner includes, what really the painting becomes is a way of trying to turn the paint into the force of nature itself. That's what he's really interested in, not a description of what it looks like, but an evocation of its forces. And that's something we see in Turner's paintings all the time, from around, toward the end of his career here in the 1840s. A few details to highlight what I've been talking about. Here is the sun itself, and you can see the way the paint around the sun in this area over here, around over here, is almost abstract. And instead, it's almost as if he's hitting the canvas with the brush, trying to imagine what it would be like if rain pelted the canvas, becoming these sort of flashes of force on the surface, and that if you hadn't seen the entire picture or only seen just a part of it, you would be hard-pressed to not think it was an utterly abstract image. Down below we have some illustration of crocodiles and whatnot leaping out of the waters, other animals engulfed in the waves. But again, Turner's paint application isn't trying to describe what it looks like, but rather describe its forces and what it feels like, what the sensation would be if this wave would hit you. Turner's most famous picture is the one in your textbook, and up in Boston, at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, shows the slave ship. It has a much longer title than that, but it's again from toward the end of his career in the 1840s, and his most famous treatment of this theme of the power of nature. If we look at details, we see the sun is really all but obliterated out into simply the power of the sun and how it hits other things in our world, the mist, for example, splitting around into that. But you can't actually see the sun delineated anywhere here. The ship on the left is deeply mired in the waves, but Turner does not seem to be describing it so much as he's trying to channel the forces of nature right onto his canvas, whether it's the rainbow effect in the clouds behind the ship or the way those waves pour over the hull of the ship. It looks very much as if the paint itself is really, in Turner's hands, becoming the water. Now, in this particular case, he's trying to make a very strong social comment. Again, we've talked about how many of these artists are deeply engaged with social issues, and Turner is one of them. This is all based on a true story. A slave ship, the one with the title, was on its way from Africa to Jamaica, taking slaves to the New World. The captain of the ship had taken out insurance against weather, and unfortunately had not taken out insurance against illness. So as the slaves were held in the hold of the ship, there was an outbreak of cholera, and the slaves began dying. The captain was going to lose all of his investment. He saw a storm on the horizon and turned his ship into the storm, hoping to collect his insurance money. As he hit the storm, the slaves were thrown overboard, 132 of them. Notice in the foreground shackles and hands disappearing into the ocean. This is the ship captain's horrific deed. The storm quickly abated. The ship was not damaged at all. And when he sailed into port in Jamaica with an empty hold of cargo with no slaves on board, he was put in his questioning tried. And this became a major event in the ending of the slave trade. But it had happened all the way back in 1783. So 60 years before Turner painted this, which raises the very important question, why is he so interested in this in 1840, almost 60 years after it happened? Here is another detail showing another leg of a slave. Again, we see the shackles on the leg falling into the ocean and being devoured by fish. Again, humans are just powerless against these creatures. Look at this amazing fish in the background here as well, coming to clean up what the fish in the foreground have not eaten. Turner's interest in the slave ship as a theme in 1840 was everything to Britain's forward steps in ending slave trade. They had outlawed slavery in 1833, and in 1839, the year before Turner painted this, the British Navy declared that all foreign slave traders would be considered pirates under British rule, which means they could be captured and brought to Britain for trial. So in 1840, when Turner paints the slave ship, this is a very timely image. It's showing the reasons why Britain had taken such drastic steps to declare slave traders as pirates so that they could be brought to justice. And again, it shows us the degree to which these romantic painters, and many painters since the neoclassical period onward, were progressive thinkers. Another British landscape painter from the 19th century, contemporary Turner, is John Constable. For Constable, nature is also untamed, but in a very different way. For Constable, untamed nature means a nature that has not been changed by technological progress. By 1821, we're deep in the Industrial Revolution, and Constable is living in London. However, this picture is a painting of the region where he grew up in rural England, a region along the Stour River, which is where he grew up. And he goes back there with a bit of nostalgia to see a region where nothing has changed. Now, in order to get that view, he has to look sort of one direction and not the other, because the region had indeed changed. But what Constable paints are the areas that haven't changed, the areas that remain untouched. He's searching for these places where nature prevails, despite the best efforts of mankind, and where, as in a more perfect age, man and nature coexisted as one. In this particular image, he focuses on a cottage that was owned by an 80-year-old farmer who had never left that cottage but for 4 days in his entire lifetime. Itself a pretty fantastic feat. So it remains a symbol for Constable, a symbol of a nature sort of frozen in time, an area where human attempts to dominate nature by industry have yet to really exist. It's a peaceful coexistence. It's the many details that emphasize this peaceful coexistence. Next to the cabin, the farmhouse, we see a woman doing laundry, washing the clothes in the river. No real plumbing here, just using the natural resources. On the opposite bank of the river, just over here, we see a fisherman, again, peacefully coexisting with nature, getting what he needs from the river. This is a place where the cart path crosses the river at an area where the Stour is shallow enough to allow a river crossing. And so, we haven't tried, for example, to build bridges or to tame the river at all. We're just using its natural ebb and flow to its best advantage. This is peaceful coexistence. And Constable does everything he can to emphasize that peacefulness, a dog waiting patiently as people come and go. It's all very, very charming. Now, this was one of a series of really very large landscape pictures that Constable did. In fact, they're 6 feet across the base, and Constable even referred to them as the six-footers, 6-foot pictures. And he made a whole series of them with the hopes that he would almost single-handedly make landscape painting a more respectable profession. Landscape pictures were not seen as important as history pictures, and Constable thinks that darn it, they ought to be. So in order to come up with these 6-foot compositions, which is no easy task, he went through a number of steps. He went outside and made sketches on site. One of the things that seems to have very much interested him were the changing skies overhead. These were painted outside well before the Impressionists, but he never intended to exhibit them. He kept them for his own study so that when he came to paint clouds inside, he knew what he was doing. He would also make sketches, small-scale sketches, of the different compositions outside and then bring those into the studio as well and amalgamate it all together. He would then turn and make a full-size sketch of the composition. So this is a different six-footer, one of the series that he's done that we have at the National Gallery, and this is a 6-foot sketch for the finished composition. In this case, it's another peaceful coexistence of man and his environment. It's the exact same cottage, seen from a different point of view. So we're sort of looking in this direction in the National Gallery picture on your right. And it shows another ferry ferrying a horse across the river with cows grazing at the side. All incredibly charming and, again, emphasizing this nature that has never been changed. These 6-foot sketches then were translated into the more finished pictures that he would display. So a work like The White Horse from the National Gallery was simply for Constable's own working process, getting into the final composition which you see on your right, which is today up in New York in the Frick collection in New York. And you can see he polishes it up. It's not as loosely painted because it's no longer a sketch, but shows us again all of these very romantic elements of a landscape that's been unspoiled by progress, where man and nature coexist in harmony. Now we see romantic landscapes in places other than England. Thomas Cole is in America, lives in New York. And in fact, we have quite a few landscape painters active in New York State. And a whole group of them were working in the Hudson River Valley, the valley on either side of the Hudson, upstate from New York City. And from New York, this area of the Hudson must have seemed, again, like an unspoiled part of nature, especially coming from the busy industrial city. This group of painters became known as the Hudson River School. It's not named after an educational institution, just a group of painters working in very similar themes. And what Cole shows us is the dawning of a new day on a pristine and unspoiled nature. Everywhere we look, we see the steam rising from the morning dew as the sky heats up, rising up from the valleys below, off of the mountaintops. Our point of view, and this is true for a lot of pictures by Thomas Cole, is from on high, looking down, almost as if we have a God's eye view over the ravine. The rising mist almost evokes the idea of the moment of creation, that we're God looking down on this pristine environment untouched by human hands. Or at least almost untouched. You'll notice in the foreground that there's this rock placed on top of the flat of another rock. That suggests maybe that someone's been there, but is peacefully coexisting with nature around him. This was actually very important for Thomas Cole, because he belonged to a group called the Freemasons. This was a secret society, still is a secret society. Its members, exclusively men, linked themselves to the stone carvers who built medieval cathedrals. Masons are stone carvers. And they believe that they descended from these Masons who built medieval cathedrals going all the way back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of Christ, the church where Christ was buried. Now, the Freemasons believed, as part of their secret rituals, that God is the ultimate Mason, that we are his carved stones because Adam was formed from the earth. So this is certainly ties into that. He shows us here, rocks are being placed atop each other, rocks that have been carved by God. Certainly nature for him, for a Freemason, but also for Cole as an individual, as a very spiritual place, a place where we can see the hand of God at work. Now, this idea is also evident in the last romantic landscape painter that we'll look at, which is Caspar David Friedrich, a German painter Very similar ideas. A wanderer in the morning finding this vantage point over a mist-filled valley. Again, a sense of nature at the moment of original creation. And a figure stopping to observe it for a bit. And Friedrich loves doing that, giving us surrogates for our own viewing experience, looking down over God's creation. For Friedrich, these ideas that nature is spiritual comes from a different source. For Cole, it's because he was a Freemason. But for Caspar David Friedrich, it comes from 19th century German theologians who are preaching that anyone who goes out and experiences nature can in fact come to a deeper understanding of God. So when we look at this gentleman out hiking about, we should think of him as looking at nature and seeing more there than just trees and rocks, mountains and skies, but rather seeing the hand of God actively at work. This is indeed what we find when we read writings from German theologians in the 19th century. They encourage people to go out, to wander the mountains and find these religious significances in what they see. We recently acquired Friedrich at the National Gallery. We've had it for less than 10 years. And it's not as dramatic as the one in your textbook, but nonetheless, it's very much filled with these romantic ideas. In this case, we have a couple of figures who have gone off into this really frozen tundra. It's just melting, though. You can see the snows are receding. And they're almost as if they're contemplating nothingness. The emptiness of nature is what's inspiring them. They've escaped, in many ways, from all of the rigidness of the industrial city, and they found then this empty landscape, this freedom for their minds to wander. They can think about anything. Friedrich loves these kinds of landscapes where the people contemplate the vastness and the emptiness of nature. At the same time, I think if we take on the idea of the German theologians who told us that we should look for God in nature, what do we find? Well, at this particular moment, we can start to see green grass poking through the snow, the ice beginning to melt on the lake. I think our two wanderers here in Friedrich's work are probably thinking about rebirth, about how at the end of the winter things that seem dead come alive again, that there is an afterlife after a seeming death. Well, I hope this gives you a good idea of the range of possibilities for landscape painters in the Romantic period, and some of the